Tired of searching for podcasts? Try Storio, the only app you need to discover and follow podcasts from across the world. Get curated podcasts and playlists every day and listen to what your friends recommend. Share what you love and find what they love. Check us out on storivoyage.com/boom. Download on App Store or Play Store. Welcome to Audio Gyan with Kedar Nimkar, a podcast that documents insightful conversations with Indian designers, artists, musicians, writers, thinkers, and creatives of all types. Catch us on iTunes or visit audiogyan.com for more Gyan sessions. Here's your host, Kedar Nimkar.
Today I have Manek D'Silva with us on Audio Gyan. Manek is an illustrator and designer based in Bangalore. His work is born from love for comics, films, and silly humor, constantly exploring modern styles and perspectives while basing it all in his traditional painting techniques and theories. A formal education in visual art keeps his work deeply grounded in traditional techniques and theory, while a keen interest in pop culture and design helps propel into fresh and unexpected territories. Thank you, Manik, for giving us your time, and it's a real pleasure to have you on Audio Gyan.
I'm glad to be here.
Yeah. So, today's topic will be around webcomics and understanding more of your work and how you have explored different territories.
Yeah.
I would also tell our listeners to check out a very good blog post on Design Fabric where Manik is documented on his personal front and how did his evolution of a designer happen.
Yeah, that was fun.
So the first question which I have for you is, if you can tell us what is the difference between like a traditional comic strip done on paper as opposed to web or maybe animation, the one which we were talking earlier about. So can you just start off with that?
Sure. So just to broaden it up, I believe that each person works in some medium, or every story is told in some medium, and you have to use the benefits of that medium to count.
Correct.
Right? So let's say if we're talking about comics and we're talking about webcomics, just because I put my comic Bonnable, like pages from it, online, I wouldn't consider it a webcomic, right? Because I'm not fully embracing what the web is offering, right? Or
do you mean to have like the web interactions and other subtleties in the medium itself, or is it about something else?
So it's about the way a story is told and the way a story is received by the audience.
Okay.
Right? So in a traditional comic, like let's say we have this book in front of us. We have a left side and a right side of this page that has opened, right? And me as the reader, I can see both sides, right? And before I even read any of the panels, before I even look at them, my peripheral vision has already like scanned this whole thing and I've taken it in. So if there's like an explosion in the bottom right corner, even though I'm starting to look at the top left corner, I know something's going to explode, right? Okay. And so in traditional comics, you're working with that format of like left page, right page. And then you flip the page and then there's this new whole left-right thing happening all over again. And so as a writer, you get that page flip is your opportunity to tell more story, right? So you plan the whole thing from top left to bottom right. In a traditional comic, you would be planning that whole thing in one go because the reader sees it in one go. Now, if we come to webcomics, like I said, I keep calling Bonnable a webcomic, but it's more just a traditional comic where I put up pages online.
Okay.
Right? So a lot, in fact, maybe the bulk of webcomics, you'll find are this format where there's a single image that you can see all of it on the website or app or whatever you're using, and then you click next or you change the image or something like that. Not scroll. So you change and then you get the next image and then the next image.
A new page.
Yeah, a new page. But that is mimicking what a book does, right? That's not really a new thing. That's just what a book does, but one page at a time, not even 2 pages at a time. Some people upload 2 pages at a time, but essentially it's just like, this is a page, then now you click, this is a page.
It's
now
like
you
a
click.
slideshow.
Yeah, it is a slideshow.
Yeah.
Right. So I wouldn't really count that as embracing web technology, as opposed to, if you think about, there are communities like Tapastic and Line Webtoon and things like that. They host comics where a lot of them use the scrolling of touchscreen devices to tell the story. For example, Jason Brubecker's Citra, one of the first scenes in that is a plane crash, and because you're scrolling on a device, you don't need to switch pages at no point. It's just a continuous image that's like this image, this image, this image, this image, this image, and there's no like end to the page. You're just infinitely just going
Scrolling
further and further into the story, and so he can expand and contract time. Like if the plane is crashing, then like you have this sequence of the plane and further and closer and fire and something and something, and as you're scrolling, you as an audience member, you scroll faster and faster because it's like these intense images, and then you reach this panel of explosion, and then the pace slows down again because you stop scrolling, right?
No,
And
but
then,
sorry to interrupt here.
Yeah.
Is this a form of just using a particular slideshow like page by page, or
Right.
scrolling a very superficial one, or you're saying that the artist has to think of panels in such a way that when it's actually scrolling, it has to be designed in a certain way?
it is different because you can't tell where the page ends.
Okay.
Like it's arranged such that
So a traditional comic cannot be laid down one below
not
the
really,
other.
not really.
Okay.
Because I mean, technically you can, but it depends on how each page ends, right? And if it's so like blocky, like if it's just like side by side, one below the other, then maybe it'll look like a normal, it'll look fine scrolling. But these artists really use the fact that you're scrolling to create sort of a seamless, you just keep going. There's no break.
The format of
There's no page
storytelling.
break. The
changes.
format of storytelling itself has changed, and your control over this whole page turn that you're used to in traditional comics has turned into your control over like swiping up, and how much you swipe up can vary because you can show like the next line, or you can show a
The
lot
entire-
of it, or you can show this whole. So yeah, your control over it also has changed in webcomics, and so I think like those because the narrative structure of those things itself is different just inherently. I think they deserve their own like terms, so that's why I call those web comics and call what I do just maybe online comics or something like that, where it's mostly just similar to print but it's online.
Yeah, it's important to understand this because you brought up this point of control as which is slightly different in an animated comic or so yeah, we were discussing about that as well. Can
Yeah.
you just share that?
Sure. So I think of different mediums in not just in terms of how we define them. So if we say movies, then we say, okay, what is a movie? A bunch of images one after another, right? And what is a book? A bunch of words one after another. So those are simplistic definitions of them. But what really separates a novel, right? One of your literature novels, from a movie. And if you think about it, it's the control that the audience has over how much of the story they're taking in at a time, right? If I'm reading a novel, okay, Harry Potter goes to as soon as I stop reading, the story stops with me, right? Literally, my brain does not know anything after that, right? So I can't, so this whole world that you've built, as soon as I stop, it's done, right? If I continue one word at a time, the story keeps going. As opposed to a movie where if I'm sitting in the theater and Harry Potter is playing, I don't have any control over that. It's just going on, right? It's being fed to me at a pace that is decided by the writer. And so comics falls somewhere in the middle of that, where, like we were discussing, as soon as you turn a page, your peripheral vision has already scanned and already, like, whether you want it or not, you know what's going on that page visually, and then you have the choice of going one panel at a time and seeing how the story is unfolding. So a podcast, for example, would be more like a movie, because you can stop listening to it or you can continue listening to it, but apart from that, it has its own pace and it's just being given to you.
Interesting,
yeah.
interesting, like notion of control you brought here.
Yeah.
The next thing which I want to ask you is, in one of your interviews with, again, Design Fabric, you mentioned, and I'll quote it, I feel that idea of literally just making something fun and enjoyable for readers is missing from a lot of modern Indian comics, quote ends. What makes you say that? I mean, can you share some insights into the world of Indian comics? I mean, because as we were speaking earlier as well, there is a whole spectrum of designers, comic illustrators who have done very political satire or have been very serious in terms of their content. Or as there is another spectrum where it's very lightweight, fun, Superman type comics, right? There isn't a in between where there's mature content shown in a fun way. So what are your thoughts on that, and why is it has been lacking in India, if I may say?
Yeah, so before I say anything, I'm going to preface it with I don't know everything that goes on in India, and I don't know every comic and artist that working, because whenever I say something like this, everyone's like, "Oh, but don't you know about this person?" I'm like, maybe I don't, so maybe it's happening. But from my knowledge and from my limited experience, this is at least the opinion that's formed so far. Is whenever Indian comics and Indian stories seem to fall into either taking it very lightly, right? And so it's just something to, something to flip through, something to distract your mind while you were working. Oh, you got a 5-minute break, look at this cartoon type of situation. Or it's something that is trying very hard to be a literary work, right? Like it's trying to, we have to, in every second line, there has to be one political message hidden. And I don't know, I feel like if you try and force, themes have to be, they have to come naturally out of the story. They can't be forced into dialogue and into storytelling. Otherwise, the reader just, if the reader knows that you're giving them that theme or that moral or that something, they sort of put up their defenses. It's just like, oh gosh, what do you
don't try to
like?
Don't
try to don't try to influence me so much. Also, and I think we were talking about it that comics, as soon as you pick up a comic, because it's a comic, you automatically have this notion that it's going to be fun, right? And so when it reads too dry or too like trying like faux literary, then you're just like, oh no, this is not a comic anymore. This is just like this is just trying too hard. And so when I said that, I think I meant I grew up with, I said it in a specific thinking of a specific thing, because when I grew up with a lot of very franchise-based stories. So like if you think of like an Asterix, so you think of
Tinkle.
Manga, or not necessarily Tinkle, very single character long story type of situations, right?
Tintin type,
Yeah, so Tintin and Asterix are episodic, but I grew up with even more long form. So like, let's say Lord of the Rings, or let's say Harry Potter, or let's say Japanese franchises like Death Note or Bleach or One Piece, or all these things. And they sort of formed my basis of what storytelling was. And so these were very long stories. So just some of them are still not over. There's just on their 900th episode and they're still going.
Okay.
So let's leave those off the table. But there's still a the way you get into stories like that is so deep. Like there's a fanaticism about it that gets perpetuated throughout the culture of Japan because these stories are so rich. And similarly with America, even though their superheroes were mostly episodic, they followed them through like very long timelines and got very rich with the whole story. And so there's this whole cultural thing there. And I think those kind of stories which are fun on the outside but have a very rich subtext on underneath, those are the ones that I feel at least are missing in India. Where I think we were talking about this example earlier of Black Panther. In one way, Black Panther is just, strong dude fighting off the bad guys. But in one way, it's also a story very clearly about politics and race and things like that. And so it's never forced upon you, but it's there. Right? You can still enjoy the crazy chase sequences and crazy, very fun things that I'm talking about, but it's still meaningful in a lot of ways. Where if they had just like come out and just made the whole plot about that, then it may not have been as effective. Right?
Interesting.
Yeah, that's all.
Okay. Another thing which I want to just ask you is slightly on a personal front. I mean, what was mainly the reason that you changed your focus from, if someone has followed your work across, change your focus from like big words, complex sentences to like actual thing, what is happening? I mean, it is a demand of that comic as well, but still you intentionally change your style. So can you tell us about more about your style and how it has evolved?
Sure. Throughout school, I think English was one of my favorite subjects. And the focus over there was writing very beautiful, complex sentences. And I thought that was what writing meant, that writing is, you have this story, that's fine, but you have to put it across in the most like vivid and elegant, beautiful way possible. And
for me, at least, English was like if like rose was ROSE, like get the spelling right. Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. But because that was so important to me, and I think it is important. It seems to be the case with a lot of people because there's a lot of writing with big words when it's not necessary, right? And so what that education or what that priority on like big complex sentences does is it makes you forget that the message is more important than the way of putting it, right? Even though the way of putting it will change how you emotionally receive the message and all that. That's fine. But I sort of started realizing that no, what you're saying is more important. Like the actual story or the actual like beats of who is this character and what is it going through. And like all that is also writing. Writing in inverted commas is not just, putting these words next to each other or making these crazy sentences. Writing involves, figuring out what this theme, like we were discussing, of the story is going to be underneath. How are you going to bring it out through interesting events through the story without being too forceful, without being too preachy, but also proving something, right? And so that has become writing for me now. It's more like a puzzle that I'm trying to figure out that, okay, if I have to say this, then what are all the, plots or interesting things that can happen to this character that would put him in a difficult situation in which whatever
but do you attribute like comic being as a medium of your expression also contributing to coming up, because in panels you have to be articulate, you have to be short,
but so I thought that initially, but I'm seeing it in everything. It's there in film, it's there in almost everything where beautiful language I still appreciate it. I send very long text messages to all my friends, and this Manek, why are you sending me? You could have just said, yes, I'm coming for dinner. You didn't have to send me this like 2-page article. I was like, no, don't take it personally. I'm just practicing my beautiful language. But it is everywhere that in good film and in good series and in good comics and things like that, there has been a lot of writing that doesn't involve the words, that involves just which plots are the best ones that would fit into each other nicely from the beginning, which would take the character through the arc nicely, which would change the character in important ways. What would we as the audience understand once this character has changed? What were the circumstances that changed this character? And therefore, in my life, if those circumstances were there, what would I do? So all that is also writing. And it doesn't even involve words being laid out to a sentence, right? And I mean, that is, of course, an important part of it, but it's only the surface of it. That's just the skin that you're putting around this, like, crazy...
to your overall thought process.
So yes, by all means have beautiful skin, but like inside all the muscles and organs and all the working parts are also writing. And I think I just didn't realize that in school. And over the years of studying storytelling, a lot of it with some friends in the Oatley Academy. I don't know if you've heard of it, but like this very nice group of storytellers and things like that. So a lot of it, studying storytelling over the years, I've just realized that writing is so much more than just words.
Yeah, so true. Every artist has his own style and creates a brand or impression of his own work, right? And I believe one of the interviews I did with Meera Malhotra, and she said, she quoted one beautiful phrase that it took me 40 years to sound like me, and this was by Miles Davis. I understand that it is a long process, but you have any thoughts on how do you what are your thoughts on building your own style? Because if you keep changing it continuously, there are very less chances of you creating an impression or creating that iconic work where you look at the work and say, hey, this is my Manek. So what are your thoughts around that?
So I'm currently in a position where I've changed styles just constantly. And
that's
I think that,
why this question is.
And so it's... And most people who like are style agnostic have something to do with design. Like, they have been in design at least a little bit, because design tells you that your opinions don't matter. You do what's right for the project. You do what's right for
the user.
The user.
It's a utility driven.
And not just utility. Like, it's so in one way, like illustrators would think of communication that way, right? Like, is my drawing communicating the right message? Is it understandable? All that. But apart from that, like, what would make the piece itself shine? So I mean, it may sound really I don't know, non-practical, but like the piece itself will tell you what styles work best for this kind of material or this kind of audience or this kind of subject matter or this kind of, like, it dictates its own style. And I can't be like, no, you should be cuter or you should be whatever. I just I'm more the messenger. So I just like, I practice a lot of different styles and I like a lot of different art. And so if a piece I'm working on requires me to study more about whatever Renaissance art or something like that, I'll just do it. Like, it's needed by the piece, and I have to just study and get better at that, and then do that for this piece. And then the next piece suddenly is like a whatever hyper modern minimal illustration, and so then I need to study that and like think about what style that piece would work best in, rather than what I want to do each time. And maybe I'm only talking visually. Maybe there are other things apart from visual language that dictates, style. Some of it has been pointed out to me, like things like humor and things like that. So there's always like subconsciously, because you are making the work,
Correct.
no matter how much you try to be like, oh no, it's not about me, it's about it's about the work. Finally, you're doing it.
Correct.
And finally, you have this history of likes and dislikes and whatever tastes that you've built up over the years. And your work is colored by that. So since I like humor and since it appeals to me, even in serious situations, humor, I think, can add nice context. Most pieces that I do will have some aspect of, well, that's a bit weird, or that's a bit funny, or something like that will always be there. Even though I like like this, the Abominable, my own comic, is a good example of it, because I set out writing this horror adventure, and every second panel I'm like laughing because like the character's just doing something that I think would be funny. And so maybe humor is one way of saying
There's
that,
there's an underlying style to
that
it.
there's an underlying style that is very Manek, maybe.
Yeah. I like the part of you being the messenger, as I think that's well put. And also, like I have interviewed like 4-5 people whom I have asked a similar type of question in a different context, and I've seen that superficially there may not be a consistency or a style pattern, but
Usually
there's an underlying current to it, which gives the character of that designer.
For sure.
Makes sense.
Yeah, there's this book called The War of Art, which talks about, I think that's where I would have got the messenger aspect of it. It's a very like philosophical book, but and it's about, I think the preface of the book is just like, a lot of books tell you how to make art. Not a lot of them tell you how to be an artist. And so the book is just about what your thoughts may be just being an artist. And so one of the thoughts is, you're the messenger. If the work requires you to do something, you do it. It's fine.
Cool, Manek, I would like to conclude with one last question, which is, again, I'm not holding you as an authority on that, don't worry about that. But what are your thoughts on like future of comics or web comics mainly, because which you are currently dealing with? How is it going to shape, what are your thoughts on how is it going to shape the coming decades in India at least?
So, a lot of... I mentioned Japan and America because there are other countries that obviously have amazing comic culture and stuff like that. But it's very interesting to look at other countries because I think they built up that comic culture very largely because of a common language and because of common interests and things like that. And so it is much harder in a country like India to have something that is so pervasive that, okay, if Japan likes Pokemon, means like 90% of Japan likes Pokemon, or at least it appears so from the outside. And to have something like that in India, which is just like,
it's too diverse to...
it's so diverse that like language is one aspect, interest is another aspect, like priorities is another aspect. So how do you get so many people on board with the same ideas or something like that? And that's obviously difficult to do, which is why I was super happy when Bahubali actually did it. It was just like, oh, there's this random fictional story, and somehow it's become this phenomenon in India that, I mean, because so much money went behind it, so much, and they got it back. Like the audience responded to it in a way that hasn't been seen in a while. And so that, I think, would be like the starting point now. So because there's this nice fictional story that's become so popular, that opens the gate for other maybe projects here and there to enter into the market and for audiences,
noticed,
for audiences are now used to this. This is like, oh, this is not this is this huge fantastical story that is pretty long and pretty like I may invest in it, and it may be multiple movies that this story may span across multiple movies, or and so the audience is more receptive to that, right? I'm mostly working with English audiences, but obviously that's like a fraction of the audience in India. Other creators may be working in different languages, and so they'll be speaking to much wider audiences, right? And so the more I keep using the word franchise, I don't know if it's the right word, but like the more properties like Bahubali that come out, the better for India, because like the more receptive everyone gets to the fact that Indian fiction can be popular. Because that's the trouble, right? Like if I mean, I'm sure there are already some series and things like that, and even Bonneville is one of them, but they are not going to get the kind of widespread popularity that a similar thing in another country would, because of these diversity things that we have in India.
Again, if you look at the urban population, at least in the metro cities, like things like Netflix have slightly opened the door to people at least getting used to this series kind of a format. And obviously for children, there is Chota Bheem who runs across India, I guess. But yeah, I got your point where you're saying that like projects like Bahubali have opened certain doors for artists to explore and communicate their stories as well. But
so I may not be the biggest fan of Bahubali, but like
neither am I.
Completely appreciate the fact that it did well. Like that's its redeeming factor, because it did well, everyone else is now like prepared to do more. Because it's like this is not a constantly failing like endeavor. There is like pieces in place.
Correct. No, but to counter this, I also did one interview with Vaibhav Kumaresh, and he said yes, there is a market to do this, but I think India needs to, because India has been traditionally for the last at least 10, 12, 14, 15, 20 years has been working on the craft of animation, especially because a lot of like we are labor intensive. That's why a lot of projects from Hollywood used to come here in Hyderabad, Chennai and other places to mainly execute stuff. So we have always concentrated on the craft. So
rather than
rather than the storytelling aspect of it. So there's a thin line.
For sure. I mean, of course, that's also tied into what I was talking about with the, like, I was so obsessed with the words, I forgot to look underneath and be like, what is the actual, like, mechanics of storytelling? What makes it a good story and stuff like that? Yes, that we obviously need to learn more and experiment more with and all that. But there are, like, because we, maybe 10 years ago or something like that, I didn't think, obviously I was very young, but like I didn't know that there were that many great illustrators in India, at least in the style that I was looking at.
Correct.
But now it's just like everywhere I look, there's some amazing artists coming up. So I don't think that's going to be the problem going forward. Like the art is getting really good. But the vehicle... like
propagate
the actual story that art is going to portray, that is going to be an issue. So like more writer artist combinations, or even more writers who are also artists, that would, I think, bridge the gap for comics and webcomics.
Correct.
Because even there are a lot of writer-artist pairs who, like, it's odd because that's how it worked abroad. Correct. But over here, writers are very often not too well-versed with how the visual aspects of a comic play out. So they're thinking of it like a novel. But like we discussed, novels and comics are completely different because of the audience control.
Correct.
So you can't even write a comic the same way you would write a novel at all.
Correct.
The underneath is fine, but finally, the writing of a comic is completely different because on every page you get that whole.
Correct. Cool. I think this is a good note to end this. And if people have to follow your work, where should they check out?
ManekD'Silva.com, I think, is the easiest way. Yeah, and from there, there's a link to Bonabyl.com, Bonabyl. I haven't updated it in a while, but it's there.
Cool. All right. Thank you, Manek, for giving us your time, and it was wonderful talking to you.
You too.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. That's it.
And that's it from today's Gyan session. Catch us on iTunes, Saavn, Stitcher or any podcasting app you use. Do rate us on iTunes and follow us on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram. Stay tuned for more Gyan on audiogyan.com. Till then, bye.
Sure, you're healthy now, but health insurance isn't about now. It's about being covered for the unexpected. When an accident or injury happens, the last thing you should worry about is how to pay for your health care. GetCovered.nj.gov can help you find an affordable plan that's right for you. You may even be eligible for financial assistance. But remember, open enrollment ends December 15th. So visit getcovered.nj.gov and find a health plan that keeps you covered, no matter what life throws at you.